Thank you all so much for joining us this evening for our town hall, Dirty Duke's rate increase, what you need to know. We are very thankful that you're all here to learn more about Duke's request to hike your bills by $42 a month so they can double down on burning coal. We've got a lot of ground to cover this evening. I'll kick it off with a quick introduction, and then we'll kick it to Kerwin Olson, our Executive Director, for a background of Duke Energy here in Indiana. Believe it or not, this is not our first rodeo with Duke. They are Indiana's largest electric utility, so Kerwin will share some important context that you need to know about Duke's operations here. And then our Ben Inskeep, our Program Director, he'll fill you in on the specifics of the rate increase. So it's very harmful for both consumers and our environment, and he'll let you know everything you need to know about that. We'll wrap up with the question and answer session at the end. So hold your questions, remember them as they come up, and we will get through as many as we can this evening. And yes, I am Kelly Hammond. I'm the Director of Development here at Citizens Action Coalition. I've been with CAC since about 2013. I started off as a field canvasser, so I may have knocked on some of your doors years ago. I'm seeing some familiar faces. But in my current capacity, I help to get the word out about the work that we do for consumers and our environment here in Indiana, and to get folks engaged in our fight for affordable utilities and a healthier environment. And of course, we've got Kerwin Olson, again, our Executive Director, who's been with CAC since 2005. He wears a lot of hats for us, which we really do appreciate. One of them is being down at the State House to make sure that consumers have a voice, because the utilities have quite a presence down there, as I'm sure you all can imagine. And then we've got Ben Inskeep presenting, of course, on the details of the rate increase. He joined our team a couple years ago. There we go. Ben, before he came to CAC, Ben analyzed utility rate increases across the country. So as you'll hear during his portion of the town hall, he's really able to drill down and analyze thousands of pages of testimony to isolate how it impacts you all, the residential ratepayers. And a little bit about us, Citizens Action Coalition. We were founded here in Indiana back in 1974. So this is our 50th year advocating for Hoosier consumers. We've saved Hoosiers about $10 billion in excess utility charges. So it is an uphill battle, as I'm sure you can imagine, being a utility watchdog, but persistence does pay off. So you keep fighting a good fight and wins do happen. We work on a variety of issues as a consumer and environmental advocacy organization. Utility issues are a big portion of what we do, but we engage in factory farming issues, pollution prevention, and healthcare as well. And really three main ways in which we do advocate for our big goals of standing up for consumers and our environment. One of those ways is grassroots organizing, so engaging with little guys because our voices are stronger when we stand together. We also, as I mentioned, engaged at the Indiana State House, so when utilities are there to push for their best interest, we're there to make sure legislators are hearing how proposed legislation impacts the people. And then finally, we also are regulatory advocates, why we're here tonight. When utilities file big cases at the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission, we comb through those cases and do our darndest to stand up for consumers throughout the entire regulatory process. So with that, I'll kick it to Kerwin for some background on Duke.
Yeah, thanks, Kelly, and appreciate everybody being here. It means a lot to see a good crowd. I know many of you in the audience, but yeah, I'm Kerwin Olson, the Executive Director of the Citizens Action Coalition. Like Kelly, I started out as a canvasser as well. I was a phone canvasser back in the day, but almost 20 years later, here I am. It's been quite the ride. I've sat in this conference room and others in this library many, many times talking about Duke Energy and coal and those sorts of things. Yeah, just want to give some quick background before we turn things over to to Ben, but Duke again, by far the largest electric utility in the state of Indiana. We've been haggling with them for almost 50 years. Of course, folks will remember they were Public Service Indiana, old PSI Indiana. For a very short time, they were Synergy, and now they are part of the Duke Energy, corporate behemoth, if you will, located in Charlotte, North Carolina. Very sophisticated, very influential. What do we mean by that? They're very, very good at what they do. They serve 69 of Indiana's 92 counties. They're getting close to 1 million customers in the state. They are very, very effective at the State House in legislative advocacy, very effective with government affairs at the administrative level and at the IURC. They are very, very effective in PR, marketing, showing themselves to the public. They engage at the community level very granularly with city councils, county councils, food banks, all of those folks. They know what they're doing, and that has garnered them significant influence and reach in the state of Indiana. One of the other bullets here is, of course, Duke is by far, as Ben will discuss, the biggest laggard in terms of transitioning to clean energy in our state. They are the most fossil fuel dependent utility in the state, maybe even in the country. When you look at their portfolio, massive costs related to their coal ash, their coal plants, and other operations, and that has led to what CAC believes is a significant affordability crisis, not only for Duke Energy customers, but also utility customers across the state. And again, we've been mobilizing Hoosiers around PSI, Synergy, Duke, whatever you want to call them, for a very long time. Wanted to just quickly talk about, CAC has always had a focus on low-income customers. Inherent in our mission is to ensure that all Hoosiers have access to affordable and essential human services. That, of course, includes utilities, and what we're seeing some staggering numbers when it comes to low-income households, even moderate-income households, with respect to their ability to afford their bills. Coupled with that, we've seen the largest increase in poverty in the U.S. Because of a lot of those COVID programs running out. We're seeing decrease in funding for the LIHEAP program. That's the federal assistance program to help customers with primarily their winter heating bills, but also if there's money left available for their summer cooling bills as well. But as you can see from the numbers, $6.1 billion in 23, and now we're getting $4.1 million in 2024. So at the same time, struggling ratepayers are experiencing more and more payment difficulties. We're decreasing federal funding and federal support for those households. And I will just add that in this rate case, which Ben will probably mention, Duke Energy is proposing zero in terms of assisting low-income households, vulnerable households, with respect to the affordability of their utility bills. And this is at the same time that Duke Energy is seeing increases in arrearages for customers. I think in their recent report that they filed with the commission, they're up to about 23% of their customers realizing utility arrearages that is greater than 31 days versus, I think, 13 or 14% back in 2019. So the data, whatever data you want to look at, folks are struggling to pay their bills, especially low-income households who are realizing extraordinary energy and utility burdens right now. Yeah, we always have to talk about Duke Energy's Edwardsport boondoggle that CAC worked on for a very long time, filing countless appeals. But just want to remind folks it's still there. Folks who were around back in the day, that was going to be the cleanest, most efficient, most economical coal plant ever built. It would be the first of a kind, and we would have these fantastic coal gasification facilities all over the country, spawning a new era of clean coal, if you will. Well, CAC didn't buy it. We didn't accept it. We knew it was greenwashing of the highest order. We knew it was nothing more than Duke Energy wanting to gouge their public, add to their rate base, and make enormous profits. And here we are 10 years later with a power plant that is incredibly expensive, not capturing a single drop of carbon dioxide. And guess what? No other IGCC power plant has been built in the country since everything else has been canceled. But here in Indiana, Duke ratepayers were saddled with close to $3 billion in construction costs, as well as billions of dollars in financing costs, and operation costs, and maintenance costs as well. And that's part of this rate case too, as Ben will discuss. And yeah, here, talking about Duke Energy and their, if you read Duke Energy's, corporate propaganda that they're greenwashing. They are sustainable. They are going to be net zero by 2050. They accept climate change, and we're working towards decarbonizing our fleets, and so on and so forth. And the reality is, if you look at that chart, 2005, Duke Energy, 96% reliant on coal, 3% reliant on gas. By my math, that's 99% reliant on fossil fuels back in 2005. Look at the bars next to it, 2023, where are they today? 75% coal, 22% gas. That's 97% reliant on fossil fuels. So we have a utility in the state of Indiana that in the year 2024 is almost exclusively reliant on fossil fuels for their energy. And you hear a lot of rhetoric out there about how it's renewables driving up the cost. That's what this rate case is all about. They're building these darn renewables. Well, as you can see, 2.1% hydro, 1.3% wind, 0.3% solar, 97% fossil fuels. So we believe a lot of what Duke is saying is simply rhetoric, PR, greenwashing, nothing more than that. The reality is Duke Energy is an incredibly fossil fuel intensive utility, which not only causes great harm to public health, it's exacerbating climate change, making matters worse, but also, we all know, the numbers are clear. Coal is expensive, coal is dirty, coal is done, yet here in Indiana, Duke Energy is doubling down on coal, which has an enormous contribution to the unaffordability of the bills, and part of this rate case. And with that, I am done, and I will turn it over to my friend, my colleague, Ben Inskeep, to dive into the deets.
Great, thanks Kerwin, and hello everybody. I am Ben Inskeep, and it's great to be chatting with you all tonight about Duke's rate case. Unfortunately, the subject is not great to talk about. Before we dive into what's all in this rate case, just a few basics about regulation in the state of Indiana. Duke is a monopoly investor-owned utility. As a result, they don't have direct competitors, and so the state of Indiana regulates them as a monopoly. That means when Duke wants to change their rates, they can't just do it unilaterally. They have to go before the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission and ask permission and get approval to make those changes to their rates. So that's what's happened here. Duke has come to the Indiana Regulatory Commission, the IURC, and is asking them for this rate increase that for an average household would be a $42 a month bill increase by early 2026 when that takes effect. Now Duke is proposing this rate increase would kind of be phased in over 2 steps. So there would be a rate increase happening as early as March of next year. And that would be a good chunk of this overall $42 a month bill increase, but not the full amount. So the full amount would then hit come March 2026 if Duke gets approval. Now I say if Duke gets approval, because this is not a done deal. This is a proposal from Duke, and the commission has the ability to modify the proposal, to accept the proposal, or outright reject the proposal. So that's why we need a lot of folks to get involved in this case, to become aware of what Duke is proposing, and to take action. And so we're going to talk about some of those shortly. So the big ticket item is how much money can a utility collect in a year? That's the revenue requirement. In order to be able to set what your rates are, how much you're going to pay per kilowatt hour, what your fixed charge is, utility needs to know what is the overall number we're aiming towards. How much do we need to cover our costs, to operate our plants reliably, to do maintenance, and then also to have a profit on top of that amount. And so they tally up that number and they figure out, okay, over a 1-year period, how much money do we need? That's the revenue requirement. And in this case, they're asking for a $500 million increase in that annual amount of money they can collect through customer rates in Indiana. That would push their overall annual revenue requirement from about $3 billion up to $3.5 billion every year. And this is just the money they take from the Hoosiers. This isn't including all of their other service territories across the country that they also have utilities in. Now, when we look at what Duke's rates have been for residential customers over time, we do see that it has steadily increased over time. So this chart goes all the way back to 2004. Looking back then, bills were about $80 a month for electricity. And you can see they've kind of increased consistently over time. The next point I'll show you or draw your attention to is in 2022. You see that large jump and then it jumps back down the next year. 2022 is when we had pandemonium in the energy markets. You might recall that was the summer when we were paying over $5 a gallon to fill up our tanks if you have a gasoline-powered car. The same thing was happening in the coal markets and in the natural gas markets that the utilities use to procure power to power their power plants. And so there was a temporary rate increase then that resulted into this large increase that was temporary. And then since that time, those fuel prices have stabilized. They've come back down to closer to historic levels. And that's why you see in 2023 and 2024, bills on average are back down to the $130, a little bit less level. In this case, Duke wants to increase bills by $42 a month over that level where they currently are, where they were in April of 2024 when Duke filed this rate case. So that's a huge increase. And I should say, this is not typical. This is not a typical rate increase. This is extraordinarily rare. I think this might be the only case I've seen a bill increase proposal this high other than CenterPoint's case in southern Indiana that just happened earlier this year and that's currently pending before the IRC. So this is a very unusual request to see this kind of a bill increase. It's not normal. That's over $500 a year increase in a typical household bill just for their electricity service. And so this is very unusual and very large. Let's break down how are they getting that extra $42 a month. Let's look at what your residential bill would look like. The first component of your bill is that fixed charge that you're going to pay every month regardless of your usage. And Duke is proposing a 30% increase in that fixed charge from $10.54 up to $13.70. Now Duke has what is called, for their energy rates, their variable rates that depend on how much electricity you use every month, an unusual way of structuring the rates called a declining block rate. This rate structure means that the first 300 kilowatt hours you use in a month is going to be priced at the highest price level, the highest price tier. Right now that's about 15 cents a kilowatt hour. They want to increase that up to 20 cents a kilowatt hour for that first 300 kilowatt hours you use in a month. And for context, about 1,000 kilowatt hours a month is a typical household, how much they would use over a 1 month period in Duke Energy's service territory. The next block of energy, the next 700 kilowatt hours you use is currently charged at almost 11 cents a kilowatt hour. Duke wants to bump that up to over 14 cents a kilowatt hour. And then lastly, any electricity you use over 1,000 kilowatt hours in a month is charged the lowest pricing tier, 10 cents a kilowatt hour currently, and Duke is proposing to increase that to 13 cents. So all those variable charges would go up about 33% each. So these are very large increases in the price of essential electricity service. Now, Duke is proposing a new optional rate that would be an alternative to what we saw on the last slide. So under this proposal, it's called a time of use rate. It would have the charges, the pricing that you pay for them would be based on the time of the day and the season of the year. You would still have that same $13.70 a month fixed charge, just like the standard residential rate. But if you decided to opt into this rate, and you have to actively select it, it's not something you would be forced onto under Duke's proposal. You would be paying variable charges that depend on the season, first of all. So this shows both the summer and the winter season. Keep in mind that summer and winter are very loose terms here. It's really dividing the year in half and calling one half of the year summer, one half of the year winter. But for simplicity's sake. And you can see these are actually identical rates except for in the winter. And I'll cover this very briefly for folks who are not accustomed to reading these small fine print graphs that go into energy rates. On the bottom of the graph, you see numbers from 0 to 23. That's the hour of the day. So at the far left, the 0 represents midnight. And you can see that they're the shortest, the price is the cheapest for those first 4 hours of the day, from midnight to 4 a.m. under this proposal. And then most of the rest of the day would be at this medium tier of about 15 cents per kilowatt hour. But then there's also these red bars that signify the peak period. And that's when Duke would be charging high rates. And the reason why they'd be charging higher rates during these periods is because these are the hours that Duke has identified using their analysis that are the tightest on the grid, that are the hardest for them to meet people's power needs, and that are the most expensive for them to generate power. So for example, in the summer, Think the late afternoon on those boiling hot summer days like today, when people are cranking up their air conditioners to try and keep up with the heat of the day. That's the time period when Duke is really cranking every last power plant they have available, and maybe even buying power from other folks on the grid, because they're just trying to meet that last unit of demand. So that's why Duke is proposing this kind of option. It encourages customers that want to opt into this rate to think about their energy usage and to respond to those price signals if they're able to do so, to help be good grid citizens, if you will, to help kind of, if you, for instance, if you're able to set a washing machine or a dishwasher to shift the time when it runs, if you just, if you're done with the day and you can set it to run at midnight, that's one example of energy usage you could shift to a time period where there's less stress on the grid. So that's the purpose of this type of a proposal. Now let's get into some of the reasons why costs are increasing according to Duke Energy. A lot of this rate case boils down to Duke's bad bet on coal-fired generation. And not only their bad bets on coal-fired generation, but their decision now to double down on coal electricity. So on this slide, you can see the three big coal-fired power plants that Duke Energy Indiana owns in Indiana. The Cayuga Generating Station, Edwardsport, as Kerwin mentioned earlier, and then the massive Gibson Generating Station, which is by far the largest of these power plants. There's 5 units there. It's over 3,000 megawatts of power, so much larger than these other power plants, but they're all relevant. As you can see to the right of the slide, Duke Energy has spent an enormous sum of money on these power plants, billions of dollars, and it still wants to be able to recover that money from ratepayers. And so as a result of its desire to recover that money from ratepayers, it wants to continue to operate those plants, continue being able to charge ratepayers, and to be able to justify those decisions, even if they were poor decisions when they made them. So diving into some of the specifics on why we are saying this heavy reliance on coal is raising bills. Well, first of all, Duke plans to burn a lot more coal this year and next year compared to the previous year. And that might be surprising. You might have heard a lot of news stories about a lot of renewable energy coming onto our grid. A lot of utilities across the country are retiring their coal plants, are moving to cleaner generation like solar and wind, battery storage. They're investing more in energy efficiency. Yet Duke Energy has come into this case and said, we're not going to decrease our coal generation. In fact, we're going to massively increase it. We're going to increase our coal generation by roughly 40% this year compared to where we were last year. So that would basically mean running their coal-fired power plants much more often than they did last year. Now, it's one of the factors that is driving this decision, we think, relates to Duke's bad bet on some very long-term, expensive coal supply contracts. So they, right when the market, right when coal prices started getting really high, Duke entered into some long-term supply arrangements to purchase coal from various coal companies. And so now it has way too much coal on hand. Its power plants have stockpiles upon stockpiles of coal just sitting there beyond what Duke needs, beyond what Duke admits it needs to keep the power plants reliably operating. So one of the proposals in this case that Duke has come forward with is a proposal that if they procure too much coal, that they're able to earn a profit on that extra coal they bought. And I wish I was making this up because it sounds ridiculous coming out of my mouth, that we would incent a utility to buy too much coal based on their own admission that they don't need that coal. But let me explain how this happens. So typically, when a utility buys fuel, that fuel cost is passed directly onto the customer dollar for dollar. They're not marking up the cost of that fuel. They spent $1 on the fuel, they're charging customers $1 total. They're being made whole, but they're not getting a profit on it. The one exception to that is that utilities in a rate case, they get to ask for a profit margin on all their materials and inventory. So the utility says, well, hey, we have this stockpile of coal, that's our inventory, so we'd like to be able to earn a profit on that. And the IURC has allowed that to happen in the past. And so Duke, in this case, is coming forth with the same proposal. They're saying, we want 45 days supply of coal on hand at each of our power plants, and we're going to calculate, a profit margin based on that stockpile that's 45 days of supply. But not only do they want that 45 days supply of coal and a profit margin on that, they're saying if that supply gets to say, let's say we have 60 days of supply on hand, far more than we actually need to operate our coal plants reliably, we now all of a sudden want to be able to earn a profit on 60 days worth of coal supply and pass that on to customers and our trackers that kind of fluctuate throughout the year. So we think that's a particularly egregious proposal that clearly is meant to benefit Duke and address their bad decisions they made with respect to coal supply, but it's not going to benefit customers. Now, Duke is also proposing to delay the retirement of several of these coal units. You might have heard something about Duke announcing that they're eventually going to be coal-free. I think 2035 is the year that they keep saying it. By 2035, we'll have gotten rid of this coal. We'll have transitioned to other resources. But then when you look at each of the units, they project a retirement date for them through their integrated resource planning process. It's an open stakeholder process. You can participate in those meetings. You can hear about how they're planning to meet the next 20 years or so of power supply to make sure they can reliably serve their customers. And through that process, they do really extensive modeling. It's really technical, and they do a lot of rigorous analysis. And when they don't do rigorous analysis, they got people like CAC barking at them, telling them all the ways they're doing it wrong and demanding that they make changes. So through that process, they have found that, yeah, actually it is economic to retire a lot of our coal plants. They're not economic anymore to continue to operate. We have much cleaner and cheaper sources of energy now. And so it does make sense to transition our fleet. But when we see this rate case and what we're seeing repeatedly across Indiana is a lot of utilities make announcements that, hey, we're going to retire this plant by 2028. But then as you get closer to that date, and you're like, okay, so what actions are you taking to make sure we can reliably serve energy? Are you going out? Are you buying new solar plants? Are you procuring wind? Are you making sure that you can reliably serve power? All of a sudden, the utility raises a bunch of arguments and says, well, actually, hold on a second. Let's hold the phone. We maybe did not procure enough power yet. We're going to kick back the retirement days of these coal units. And so we're seeing that in this rate case where Duke is suggesting some of these previously announced retirement dates are going to be pushed back further. So that's really problematic because, again, their modeling already showed it's not economic. You should be switching to cleaner and cheaper sources of energy. You shouldn't be continuing to operate these old plants that are not doing so in an efficient and affordable manner. Now, when you burn a lot of coal, you generate a lot of pollution. And a lot of people, what they think about is the smokestacks, the smoke coming out of it, the carbon dioxide emissions, and the contributions to climate change. But there's another pernicious pollution caused by coal plants, and that's related to the coal ash that's created. When you burn coal, there are portions of that coal, small parts that are inorganic, that don't burn, that don't combust, and are left over in the form of ash and similar types of constituents. And it's not just a small amount. We're talking millions upon millions of tons of this stuff. And Indiana is the leading state with the most coal ash ponds in the country. Well, the Environmental Protection Agency has enacted regulations that are forcing utilities to take this seriously because what data has consistently shown over and over again is that these coal ash ponds and these coal ash landfills that utilities have across the country, what a lot of them have done is just taken that coal ash and literally just dumped it in a big pile right next door to the power plant. Oftentimes they'll put it in a pond, it'll have water in it, or at least rain can get into it. And what that happens is when coal ash comes into contact with water, it grabs those constituents in that coal ash that are toxic and carries them out of the facility into our groundwater, into our surface water, where it can then cause problems because it can get into your well water or into our riverways. And coal power plants, they all need a ton of water to operate, and so they're all located on the banks of our major rivers in Indiana. The White River, the Ohio River, Wabash River, these rivers. And so we have a lot of coal ash sitting on the banks of our rivers, on the banks even of Lake Michigan, up in NIPSCO's territory. In this case, Duke Energy is wanting ratepayers to pick up the tab of these extraordinary costs of cleaning up these coal ash messes that Duke Energy made. It was their decision to dispose of this coal ash in an unsafe manner, and was their decision to keep it there for decade upon decade upon decade on end, even as the evidence mounted that this was creating pollution, that this was not a safe way to do it, that the industry was aware that this was not a safe way to store this really hazardous toxic waste. And now that they're finally being forced to clean up their mess, they don't want to pay a dime for it. They want ratepayers, you and your families and your customers, to pick up the tab, and it's not cheap at all. At the end of the day, it's likely going to be more than $1 billion in coal ash costs. That's likely going to be the end of the day. But what Duke Energy has done is it has divided up its many coal ash ponds and landfills, and has separated them out into many different cases at the IURC. So it's kind of divided them up and hit the ball. Nowhere does Duke come out and say, we have $1.2 billion in coal ash costs, or we have this much. It's really kind of hiding the ball about how much is this all going to cost at the end of the day. And we don't know, because there are a number of coal ash ponds and landfills that it has not come out with plans yet on how it's going to clean up those messes. So, bringing it back to here and now, what's this $42 a month? What's going to be in that bill increase? Well, in this rate case, Duke is proposing, $223.5 million in coal ash cleanup costs that would be included in your rates. These would be new costs that are not currently approved by the commission. In fact, $92 million of that amount was previously disallowed by the Indiana Court of Appeals. The court struck down that amount and said, no, Duke, you don't get to collect that from ratepayers. Duke has come back in this case with a new legal argument to try to justify saying that no, actually, we can collect it using this different legal theory. So they're trying to get around that Court of Appeals ruling. Now, just a month ago or so, the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission approved another big bucket of coal ash cleanup costs, $327 million worth. That was in a separate case, but some of those costs are going to be rolling into your rates as a result of this rate case. Duke has special permission to use a tracker or bill rider, and what that does is that allows them to, when they spend money, they can quickly come back to the commission and get it added to your bills outside of the rate case. In this case, though, they are going to be taking some of that money that they're spending through that process, and they're going to be rolling them, putting them into your base rates. And then after 2026, after that phase 2, after that $42 a month bill increase hits, they're going to keep spending money on coal ash cleanup. And those costs are going to be rolled right into your rates on top of that $42 over time as they spend the money to clean up those coal ash costs. So we continue to urge the commission not to allow the utilities to just force all these costs onto ratepayers who are not responsible for these large messes that the utilities create. So, one second, I'm going to drink water real quick. Sorry. So Kerwin mentioned earlier that Edwardsport power plant, that gasification power plant. Now what that power plant does is it takes coal, and it gasifies it and turns it into a gas that Duke can then combust in that facility to create power. So it's a very one-of-a-kind power plant in the country, as Kerwin mentioned. It's a very interesting plant. Very, very expensive plant, over $3 billion. That's an extraordinary cost for a power plant that produces relatively little power for that cost. Now it wants to slap on a new technology, another expensive technology, another experimental technology called carbon capture and sequestration. And before it does that, it wants to do a study. You think, okay, sure, study it. Not so fast. This isn't just a simple, cheap study. This is $18 million study. It's an $18 million study. So a very expensive study to look at the feasibility of adding this technology to the plant. It's called a FEED study, a front-end engineering design study, I believe is that acronym. And it would look at the technological capability of adding that technology to the plant, the costs of it, and is it feasible to inject the carbon dioxide that technology would capture at that plant, to put it under extraordinary pressure, and to stick it underground right underneath the power plant, sequestering it supposedly over the long term. Now, it has gotten some money from the Department of Energy to fund part of this part of the study, but it is asking the regulator for permission to track the costs it spends on the study, and then come back in the future and raise your bills to pay for the study. Now, we're all for studies. We're all for looking at the data. We're all for making sure we're analyzing things. We don't want them to rush into a project without making sure they've dotted the I's, crossed the T's. However, there is a study ongoing right now called the Integrated Resource Planning process. That's the process where the utility looks at all of the resources, looks at the entire system, and analyzes which resources should we pursue. Should we pursue carbon capture and sequestration on our plan? Should we pursue solar plants? Should we procure wind plants? Do we need to buy them now? Do we need to buy them in 5 years? Do we need them in 10 years? What's our load going to be? Are we having new industrial customers come in, creating a lot of power demands? Or is it pretty stable and even keel? Or are we losing customers and our power's going down? So it analyzes all these variables, and it comes up with what is the best plan for the next 20 years to meet our needs. So that would be the logical starting place, right? You would want the utility to analyze in that planning process all those potential options and figure out what meets our environmental goals, what meets our affordability goals, what's reliably serving power. And then, if that study process said, okay, yep, carbon capture and sequestration is the way to go, then you might expect a utility to come before the commission and say, okay, we're going to now go to the next step of the process and look at this more detailed study. So Duke here has put the cart before the horse. They want to spend a huge amount of money on the study when their integrated resource planning process, which is where this would be a good place to do it, has not found carbon capture and sequestration as a good investment. It has repeatedly found Duke should actually take this power plan and stop gasifying coal on day one because it makes no economic sense to do so, and just convert it into a straight natural gas power plant, which is very technically feasible and far more affordable for operating it. So long story short is we oppose this not only because we have very serious reservations about this carbon capture and sequestration technology, but also because Duke is just jumping the gun and moving forward with this expensive study, wanting to put it on ratepayers to pay for it, when we know very clearly that this doesn't make a lot of technological or economic sense at this point in time. Okay, every rate case deals with the profit margin of the utility, and this is no different. Just like every other rate case we see, utilities coming in with an increase in their profit margin request. Right now, Duke has an authorized return on equity, which is that profit margin, at 9.7%. They want to bump that up to 10.5%. So increasing for every dollar they invest, increasing how much profit they get to take out of your pockets and send to their shareholders. Now, that might sound like a small change, 9.7 to 10.5. But when you multiply small percentage changes by billions of dollars, it has a very big impact on you and your families. The chart on the right here shows an example of that. At the very bottom of that chart, you see that 10.5% proposed, that's Duke's proposal, and that results in a rate increase of nearly $500 million, that $491.5 million. Just changing that one variable though, that 10.5%, if you just kept it where it currently is, at 9.7%, that would change Duke's rate increase down to $433 million. So that would save ratepayers $50 million or so, just by changing that one percentage, just by saying, Duke, just keep your profit margin where it is. You're already earning plenty of money. Like, we don't need to give you even more for your shareholders. Now, we could even go further and say, well, 9.7 is a pretty darn healthy profit margin for a monopoly utility that has hardly any risk. Maybe we need to be lowering that down. So if we lowered it to 9%, we could save over $100 million in this rate increase. So a very big impact. That's why this detail matters a tremendous amount, and that's why utilities spend a lot of time and money fighting on this one very small detail. Speaking of profit, let's look at what have Duke's profits actually been in the past few years. Now this is Duke Energy Indiana. This is just the money that they're making off of Hoosiers, right? This has nothing to do with North Carolina or their customers in Florida. What you can see is that this last year, Duke had a record profit year. They made almost $500 million in pure profit alone. Now, what about that year before that? What happened in 2022 that stands out as a bad year for Duke? Well, it was a bad year but not because of things you might think. It's because of a Supreme Court decision here in Indiana, where the Supreme Court said, for a very specific set of coal ash costs that Duke spent hundreds of millions of dollars on in the past, the Supreme Court in Indiana did strike down those costs and said, no, you don't get to come back many years later after spending that money and charge ratepayers for that money. That's not fair. So, a pretty darn significant win for consumers, that case was.
Except the commission approved it. That's why that went to court.
Yeah.
Exactly. So yes, the commission initially approved it, had to go all the way to the Supreme Court of Indiana, where they said no. So that's what happened. So the long story short is Duke's been very profitable. You see no bars here going into the negative territory, right? They're making a profit every darn year, even the year where they lost a couple $100 million as a result of that Supreme Court decision. Let's zoom out bigger into their parent company, Duke Energy Corporation, which owns utilities not only in Indiana, but also in Ohio and Kentucky, North Carolina, South Carolina, and Florida. They're also making money hand over fist. They're very financially healthy. In fact, since 2017, that parent company has made over $19 billion in profits. Huge amount. As you can see on the figures on the right-hand side, the earnings metrics, which are very important to companies like Duke Energy, those are also trending upward consistently over time. So again, very healthy economic, financially. This is not a company that is financially struggling, that needs massive increase in the rates in order to be able to keep the lights on. Now, unfortunately, when a utility like Duke comes to the commission and asks for a rate increase, you can open the books and you can see all the ways that they're spending money on things that go beyond power plants, beyond the wires and poles that provide us reliable power. It includes a lot of money spent just to try and influence policymakers in the state. Now, Duke Energy will tell you that, no, hold on a second, we take out our lobbying costs. Our lobbying costs are not built into your rates. And they're right to a small extent. I'll give them credit for this. They do look at lobbying costs, but what they do is they look at a very narrow legal definition of what falls into lobbying. And that is a very small bucket of costs. There's a lot of activity you can do to influence policymakers that is not legally classified as lobbying. So that could include just hiring really good attorneys, and it could include educating and schmoozing with lawmakers and policymakers, maybe not about a specific bill. It could include public relations and advertising. It can include all sorts of other things. And now, of course, you also might stop me and say, well, even if the lobbying isn't built into rates, where did that money come from to pay the lobbyists? Well, at the end of the day, that came from that return on equity, right? That profit margin that's built into the rates that you pay. That's where Duke is getting the money to then hire lobbyists. So at the end of the day, even if they're taking it out of your rates, supposedly, it's still coming from you from one way or another. Now, I'll wrap up here with just a couple more slides on just a few other small items, maybe not so small, but are things I won't maybe dwell on in detail, but be happy to talk more about in the Q&A portion. One is we have a very big concern about how Duke is splitting up the costs in this case between its industrial customers, its commercial customers, and its residential customers. We're really concerned by the methodologies they've used that stick a lot of the costs onto residential customers and let a lot of the big industrial customers pay a far smaller portion of the share costs that they caused in the first place. So for example, coal ash is one example of that. Even though industrial customers relied on that coal generation to power the factories, Duke wants residential customers to pay a much larger portion of those coal ash costs than they were actually responsible for. So if residential customers generated 100 megawatt hours of power, Duke's coming and asking for 150 megawatts worth of coal ash that you pay for. That's kind of an example. Now Duke, we'll get to that one shortly. But Duke also wants to increase its rates. Part of that $500 million rate increase is wanting to pay for energy that it doesn't sell. Let me explain. When Duke is implementing these time of use rates, I mentioned there's that optional new time of use rate. They're saying that we think some of our customers are going to save money by going onto the time of use rate. Now, we don't like that because we're Duke Energy, and that means we're going to collect less revenue than we want to in this case. So what they've done is created a projection about how much money they're going to lose by customers switching over to rates that could save them money, and they built that into this rate increase. So $16 million, I know, it's ridiculous. They pulled the number out of the hat almost when you look at how they calculate that 16 million, because they don't know what's going to happen. For all they know, residential customers could switch out the rate and could end up paying more on their bills. It's pretty hard to tell a year from now, am I going to be using power between 5 and 9 p.m.? Is that going to be more or less than I'm using? There's a lot of factors that come into play, and it can be really hard to predict whether you're going to save money or lose money on a rate like that. So it's particularly egregious that they would build in those costs. Speaking of egregious, Duke wants you to pay for their executives to fly on private Gulfstream aircraft. I wish I was making this up, but yes.
This is not a Saturday Night Live skit.
They have 3 private Gulfstream aircrafts and 5 helicopters Duke Energy Corporation does that are shared across the utilities, and they have allocated a portion of those costs for Hoosiers to pay in their bills. They want their executives to fly in comfort, not commercial. We all know what a hassle that is. But we all know that is ridiculous for ratepayers to pay for. That's something the company pays for. Finally, Duke is charging you for this rate case itself. $2.5 million they want to pay for their attorneys, their experts, and their time to come up with this plan, to vigorously fight for this rate increase before the commission, to fight any appeals that any party might have, and to get this rate increase passed. So that includes over $1 million just for the lawyers in this case. Over $1 million. $75,000 just for their one expert to argue for a higher return on equity, a higher profit margin. We're giving them $75,000 to write some testimony. We also have $150,000 for special witness training consultants. I don't know what a witness training consultant is, but I don't think they need $150,000 for it. And I would be remiss to not mention just the exorbitant amounts of money that Duke's executive leadership team makes. Lynn Good, the president and CEO, over $20 million a year in her total compensation last year. She owns nearly $50 million in Duke stock as of the end of last year. And as you can see, lots of others on here. They're very well compensated, and that compensation comes generally from ratepayers' pockets. And as we said, Duke is doubling down on coal. It's also failing to take action on clean energy. Duke does not have community solar. So if you can't put solar on your roof, you can't get access to solar from a solar system in your neighborhood. It's illegal to purchase electricity from somebody who's not Duke Energy when you're in Duke Energy service territory. Duke also helped end solar net metering, the popular policy that allowed a lot of folks to go solar and affordably do so and make money over the long term. Duke's not proposing any rapid increase in its utility scale renewables. So you might say, well, we got to be charitable. They started at nearly 100% coal. It's going to take time. We don't think it's going to happen overnight. Sure, that's fair. But Duke's also not taking aggressive action now to build new renewables so that they can make that transition. It's not committing to go coal-free by 2030. Again, 2035 is still the timeline they say. And even those dates could be slipping. We saw that they're not proposing to decrease coal generation, but actually massively increase coal generation this year and next year relative to where they were in the past. So that would increase their carbon dioxide emissions, not decrease them, in the short term at least. There's no battery incentive program. There's no special EV charging incentives or rate. The last thing is they do have an energy efficiency program. So that is one thing they have going for them. We do participate on their oversight board and closely scrutinize their energy efficiency plans to try and make sure that they're the best they possibly can be. So we do encourage you, if you are making a significant upgrade to your house, buying a new appliance like a water heater or HVAC unit, check out Duke Energy's website on this, because there are savings for energy efficiency investments that you can get from the utility in the form of a rebate or similar types of ways to save money. So that is something we do encourage. Now let me turn it over back to Kelly for how you can take action in this case, how you can stand up to Duke Energy and tell the regulators to reject this proposal.
Thank you, Ben. And I think we have plenty of motivation to take action. If it wasn't the private jets or the $150,000 for expert, whatever that was. A lot of money for things.
Witness consultant.
Yes, thank you, Kerwin. Tip of my tongue. It is critical to take action. As Kerwin mentioned at the beginning of this call, Duke is incredibly influential and savvy. They're the biggest electric utility here in Indiana. Their parent company is one of the largest energy holding companies in the country. So all of us coming together to speak up and to stand up for our communities is going to be what it takes to get the best outcome for not only consumers, but also our environment, because both are under threat with this case, as we've learned. There are a few different ways that you can take action, and up at the top, next week, 1 week from today, there is a public hearing where you have a chance to speak directly to state utility regulators and let them know how you feel about Duke's request to raise your bills. We'll mention, just another little note, our utility regulators are appointed without public oversight. So it is extra important that they hear from you. Also, they're hearing plenty from Duke, so please keep that in mind. That's why we love to have a strong turnout 1 week from today. We do know that not everyone can attend public field hearings. Maybe they have to work, maybe they have difficulty with transportation. So submitting written comments is also another really important action that people can take. Public comments are accepted by the Office of Utility Consumer Counselor through July 5th. We also appreciate everyone taking the time to help spread the word. Digitally, right? Social media, texting your friends, emailing your friends. But I will say, even with all the digital things, word of mouth makes a big difference. So chatting with your neighbors, flagging folks down at the grocery store, whatever you can do, the more that we get this out there and help folks know about what they can do, the more folks that will be able to take action. And CAC, we know life is busy. So we make every effort that we can to make it as easy as possible for folks to get involved and to learn about this case. So our webpage is a wonderful resource with the ins and outs that we've gone over today, access to these slides. We'll have a recording of tonight up there as well. And we also make it easy to submit written comments as well through a form on our website. So the more we can spread those resources out, the better. Now, a little bit more on the public field hearings, and I will say these are field hearings from the last year and a half or so. We've had all the big electric utilities come in for rate increases recently in the last year or so. They've kept us very, very busy. And field hearings, to me, they can be very heartbreaking because you hear stories from folks about what they're going through already without the increase and what will happen when they're concerned about paying for this increase. So in relation to Duke, last week we had the Terre Haute field hearing, and I got tears in my eyes. My mom taught for 42 years, and a couple teachers spoke, and they talked about how all the extra funding that the teachers have out of their own pockets goes back to helping the students. And one of the teachers talked about how she just got a pay raise, and if this rate increase goes through, that pay raise is gone. And I think it's very important, that's quite a contrast to Duke breaking in quite a bit of profit here in Indiana and also around the country. And so when our regulators are hearing a lot of technical stuff from the utility, it's important for them to hear those stories too, right? And as heartbreaking as field hearings can be sometimes, they're also very inspiring because you see a community pull together. So if you are free next Thursday night, we'd love to see you there, and please tell everyone you know about it, because the more folks that show up, the better. If you'd like to testify at the field hearings, I will say public speaking is not everybody's cup of tea, and that's totally fine. If you don't want to speak, that's fine. Showing up just to be there makes a big difference. But if you do feel comfortable speaking, like I mentioned, sharing your story is huge because it puts the human aspect, which we can't forget, and sometimes that is forgotten. So explaining how this will impact your family or your community to state utility regulators is such a big help. You can also read written comments aloud, right? You get sworn in, which I think can be intimidating, and depending on the size of the crowd, I will just go back and say, this picture right here, that was Evansville, and that field hearing lasted 8 hours.
Almost 8.5, yeah, 1,200 people, never seen anything like it.
Yeah. And that's CenterPoint Energy, which they've had the highest electric bills in Indiana since 2008. And when CenterPoint came in with a $47 a month increase, our mouths dropped open. And then Duke comes in with this $42 a month one. So, I mean, I will say, and we have this on our YouTube channel as well, we record these. So if you'd like a little bit of motivation or to see what they look like and what people say, please check out our website. We link to our YouTube from there. It's well worth it. I forget why I was bringing up CenterPoint. Anyway, it was a wonderful showing. Yes, a field hearing. It was a wonderful showing, and I guess that solidarity, right? Not everybody there spoke. I think they had about 70 people speak, but the community really pulled together. They had city councilors show up. It was quite an event. And it can be intimidating to speak in front of a big group of people, so if you feel comfortable, you're welcome to write your comments beforehand and then read aloud in that moment. And being polite and concise and sticking to your viewpoints is also recommended. There can be a lot of emotion associated with a monopoly utility wanting to raise electric bills so they can make more money and destroy our planet, right? But in the moment, what we're trying to do is to get regulators to understand where we're coming from, not make them defensive. So it does help to work through that, get your comments out, and then, speak from the heart, but stick to the points in the moment. We will get to questions in just 1 second. But just to emphasize, rate cases are very lengthy proceedings. They take nearly a year to resolve, but just to point out, Duke filed in April, and the first 3 months is basically when we pack in the public comment period. So we've got 3 months to get written comments in. I think it took us, a couple weeks to wade through thousands of pages of testimony and very detailed spreadsheets.
We're still wading through them.
We are still wading through them. So it's the public comment period being stacked in the beginning, it means we've got to hustle. So after the public comment period, we file testimony along with other interveners. And then it's a legal proceeding. So there are different elements throughout. I will point out that evidentiary hearing. Those you can live stream or show in person, but it's sort of like a court case, and it can be very wonky, but there can be very exciting moments in that as well. So a lot coming up.
Yeah. And the reason you're not going to see us going up to the mic and testifying at the public hearing next week, because we're going to be doing our written testimony. We're formal interveners. We're formal parties in the case. We're still fighting for you. Just because you don't see us speak at the mic next week doesn't mean we don't care. We're very actively involved.
Yes. And you will likely see our lawyer Jen up there at the beginning. So if you need a friendly face to look at Jen.
Yeah, don't yell at Jen.
Yeah.
There were people in Evansville like yelling at everybody on stage.
Yeah.
I'm like, don't yell at Jen.
She's got a heart of gold. I don't know how we managed to get a lawyer with a heart of gold, but we did it. So with that, I think we'll open it up to questions.
What is the makeup of the utility, and like how many Republicans and how many Democrats are on that commission? That's just the first part of the question.
The IORC has 5 commissioners. State law says no more than 3 can be from the same political party as the governor. So generally speaking, during the Bayh, O'Bannon, and Kernan years, we had 3 Democrats, 2 Republicans. During the Daniels, Pence, Holcomb years, we've had 3 Republicans, 2 Democrats, and we are one of only three states in the entire country where regulators serve at the will and pleasure of the governor, with either with no oversight from the legislature or without being directly elected. 14 states directly elect regulators. The other states, they have confirmation hearings before one or both bodies of the legislature. But New Hampshire, Nevada, and Indiana, we just let the governor pick and choose.
Is there research in Indiana of what convinces the regulatory commission the most? Because I went to the Edwards Court hearing in Bloomington, I don't know, 2012 or something like that. And
2007.
Duke bust in busloads of people for their side. That's called astroturfing, or what is it? Yeah. And those people they had been trained. They knew what they were saying. It was very discouraging. So, I mean, I'm just not sure what is our best strategy to use. I'm sure we're all mad, but I don't think that helps. My daughter's partner, since I've known them, they've been together for 8 years. He's from down near Evansville. Both his father and his grandfather have died of lung cancer. And that's from being down where all those coal plants are. They're convinced, their family's convinced. Although a lot of them they know down there, people are dying of lung cancer.
Well, I would say what is most important is that the commission hears from the public. We don't give up at the State House. We don't give up on policy. We show up on election day and we vote. We support our candidates that we want to win. This is the same type of situation. This is something where the commission needs to hear from the public because it's reaching a tipping point in terms of affordability. I've been doing this almost 20 years now, and I can see the winds starting to blow in a different direction. Why? Because the greed of the monopoly utilities in the state of Indiana is starting to catch up to them. What I saw in Evansville has re-inspired this very jaded, cynical Kerwin. You know, I saw a huge crowd that stood tall from 2 p.m. till 11 p.m. speaking to that commission, packing that they had to move the hearing to another room because it was too big. I saw the chairman of the commission during one of the breaks sitting in a corner, sort of looking down at the floor, and you could see it in his eyes like, what am I going to do about this? Because there were 1,200 people in the room. Virtually every political body down there, whether it was the Vanderbilt County Commission, the Evansville City Council, Newburgh County Council, they all passed resolutions opposing the rate case. The first two speakers at the hearing were the newly elected Democratic mayor. Second speaker was the Republican that she beat in the primary. So there were Democrats, there were Republicans, there were small business owners, there were senior citizens, there were veterans, there were young people, there were homeless people testifying because they had been evicted because of their utility bills. So there's a change in brewing. And I know, believe me, Kerwin knows how frustrating it is fighting the utilities in the state of Indiana, but we cannot give up. And when we have an opportunity to go before these 5 appointed and unaccountable people and tell them the impact that this has, whether it's affordability problem, whether it's seniors trying to choose between picking up that prescription, paying rent, or paying that bill. It's disgusting that we have a company making $3 billion a year while nearly a quarter of their customers are late on their bills. They're disconnecting 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 people a month. That is not okay. It is not acceptable that Duke Energy Indiana wants to increase burning of coal, which not only exacerbates public health problems, environmental problems, climate problems, but also is a huge contribution to the affordability problem with bills and why your bills are increasing. These are the things the commission needs to hear, and I can tell you, I share your I'm just gonna go home and watch Law and Order, you know? But we can't give up. You don't give up when it comes to elections, when it comes to legislation, when it comes to policy. Don't give up when it comes to your utility bill. You've got the opportunity to have your voices heard and participate.
I had a question on influence peddling. It appears that Duke has yielded to community pressures in other states in implementing renewables much better than they have in Indiana. And I'm trying to understand the root cause of that. Is that it seems like, yeah, we can beat up these 5 people that have, gotten great benefits of the tutoring from the utility company, but it seems like our biggest problem is our legislatures and the chairmen, the people that also get a lot of influencing monies from that. So, but can you validate that Duke and other states are doing much more significant improvements in the renewable energy portfolio?
Yes, and with all due respect to my good friend Representative Matt Pierce, yes. The problem is the Indiana General Assembly, no question about it. The IURC is a creature of statute. They will remind everybody repeatedly, we are a creature of statute, empowered only with the authority granted to us by the General Assembly. We have seen a host of bills, really going back to 2003, but really from 2007 until today, that literally were at the behest of the electric and gas utilities, that allow the electric utilities to recover costs for coal ash, that mandate, for all intents and purposes, the commission approve this stuff. State law all but mandated that the commission approve Edwardsport. Everybody knew Edwardsport did not meet the economic sniff test. It was too expensive. It was a pipe dream. It was a fantasy. Yet we had statutes passed by the Indiana General Assembly that said it's in the public interest of Indiana to invest in coal gasification. It's in the public blah, 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 and the commission shall approve. Edwardsport, sorry, I get going on Edwardsport because I ate, slept, and breathed Edwardsport for over a decade. And it's just so infuriating because with Edwardsport, talk about influence peddling, we had the Edwardsport ethics scandal. Chairman of the commission fired, charged with 4 felony counts. President of Duke Energy Indiana fired. Second ranking officer of Duke Energy Corporate, Chief Operating Officer James Turner, resigned.
Anybody
And
go to jail?
nobody went to jail. Nobody lost their job other than those 3 folks. And guess what? You all paid for it and continue to pay for it. So yes, that said, so yes, the General Assembly passes these laws at the behest of the utilities that, eliminates flexibility and discretion for our regulators. Why did we create the Indiana Utility Regulatory Commission? Because we have monopolies. What do monopolies not have? Competition. So in an idealistic world, that regulatory commission is a surrogate of competition. They're supposed to represent the competition that doesn't exist. And yet then we have General Assembly passing laws that undermine the discretion and flexibility of the commission, virtually eliminating all of their competition. And then they take it a step further at the behest of the utilities. They kill net meter. They kill the energy efficiency resource standard and energizing Indiana. Ben was talking about the coal ash cost. I've never seen anything like it. Representative Pierce was down there. Court of Appeals says no. A couple of days later, there's an amendment to a bill in a House committee that passes, goes over to the Senate, passes. So within 7 days of when the Court of Appeals said no, the Indiana General Assembly changed the law at the behest of Duke Energy Indiana. That's all the evidence you need about the influence peddling and the amount of influence and power that Duke Energy yields. A week. Took them a week to change the law, and now they're trying to use that, as Ben indicated, in this case, to collect costs that the court already said no. But they changed the law. So yes, and, sorry, I rambled, but your question, North Carolina, policy. It's state policy. They have carbon goals. They have solar tax credits. They have much, but Ron DeSantis, of all people, vetoed the bill that would have killed net metering in Florida. So it's policies at the state level, and in Indiana, the reality is Duke Energy and the other investor-owned utilities own this state, lock, stock, and barrel. They own the administrative agencies, they own the legislature, they own the courts, and they own many, if not all, of the city halls, county halls in the 69 counties that they serve. And so that's why we need people to comment, show up to hearings, and show up because enough is enough. But if the commission holds hearings and 3 people show up, then the commission's going to go, I guess this isn't that big of a deal. So that's why we're strongly encouraging participation.
Are you at liberty to say who the bad actors are in our legislature?
I now regret taking the microphone from Kelly.
Yeah.
Well, we are a nonpartisan organization, but there is no question, that we have challenges. with the current chairs of the utility committees in the House and Senate, as well as leadership. So, you know, the chairman of the House Utility Committee is Representative Ed Soliday, and chairman of the Senate Committee is Representative Eric Cook. And we have very different ideas about what things should look like.
I mean, we have very good legislatures. We have some very outstanding people. The problem is some of the key people at the top. That's where the head of the snake that needs to be cut off. You know, but I think we need greater visibility at how much they're getting paid, these influences. You know, the Star has done a couple of reports that talked about how much these committee chairs have been paid. I don't think they've done it in a couple of years. It's hard to get that information through FOIA. But, so I hate to think, you know, Matt's one good, he's not the only good guy. You know, there are other good people.
There are lots of good legislators down there, and Senator Cook and Representative Soliday, I've known them for a long time. They're good people. There's a misbelief that they're not smart. They're incredibly bright. They're incredibly smart. They understand the energy markets. They understand utilities. They understand the law. They understand how that stuff works. We just disagree very strongly. But when it comes to campaign contribution and voting records, we have extensive campaign contribution information and voting records on our website going back to 2008. You can go to our Politics and Money page. You can click on any legislator, and you can see their voting records with CAC bills going back to 2008, along with their contributions from the industry. So. I guess I have the microphone, Kelly. Yeah.
Are there any shareholder activism going on with Duke?
There has been.
What was the question? Couldn't hear.
Is there any shareholder activism? I've attended several shareholder meetings myself with our friends in North Carolina, because their shareholder meetings are held in Charlotte. So the folks in North Carolina, you know, NC Warren, AARP, they generally do shareholder activities at Duke shareholder meetings. There's another group. It's been a minute since I've talked to them, but there was a larger national group formed around shareholder efforts. One of them was focused on Duke. And Megan Anderson asked me the other day about this, and I promised to get back with her, but I have to find that group that was working on this stuff, and I'll get that information out when I find it. Yeah.
I've got a math question.
Uh-oh.
Nice and simple, no emotion involved in it. You got my attention back around slide 12, 13, or 14 when you were breaking down the bill.
Yeah.
And the fixed fee was like $10.30. And I noticed I'm paying $11.25 or so cents. And I wonder if the 7% difference is the effect of state sales tax. And if that's the case, is your $42 that you're talking about actually going to be $45?
Yes. You do not include sales tax in that.
That's correct. I
Yes.
do not include sales tax impacts on those rates. So great point.
And just so
On top of that.
Just so you know, all these data centers coming and these crypto mines coming, they don't have to pay sales tax. They don't have to pay property tax. What is it, Meta? I think it was Meta, one of them that got, what, a 20 or a 30-year waiver of sales tax? But, you know, you gotta pay it on your utility, yeah. Michelle?
Okay, a couple of questions for you. First off,
Oh, they're written down.
I know. First off, though, I do want to thank you for pointing out the return on equity is another reason to row your boat this November. And do the studies cause a pause on the clock if they're like a coal plant trying to close? And they go, oh, no, but we want to do a study. Does that pause anything?
No.
No, okay. And then the second question, going back to your data mining, will coal ash continue to be an issue as we bring in more of these data minings things? Like we're paying for coal ash in perpetuity while these kinds of companies are coming in?
As long as we're burning coal, we're making coal ash. So the
okay.
question is, how are we gonna serve those data centers? That remains to be seen. But it's clear that, you know, Duke Energy, along, I know folks know Reliable Energy, they used to be the Indiana Coal Council. They're now the lobbying group for primarily Alliance Coal and Sunrise Coal. They're incredibly active. They're writing op-eds out there. They're getting out there, and they had an op-ed going around the state about, we're going to need to keep these coal plants open for these data centers, you know, even though there's another way we could serve those customers. So as long as we're burning coal, we're making coal ash, and state law in Indiana pretty much mandates that you pay for it. Yeah.
And is it true that one of the coal plants got purchased by a private investor to keep running for a crypto mining?
That was Hoosier Energy's Merom plant. Hoosier Energy announced that Merom was retiring, and then a year or so later, Hoosier Energy announced that they were selling the coal plant to a new entity known as Reliable Power. Reliable Power is an affiliate, a subsidiary, one of those of Reliable Energy. So Reliable Energy now has Reliable Power, and they own and operate the Merom coal plant. Save that from the graveyard, if you will. And their first customer was a crypto mine that set up shop right by them. Yes.
And who oversees that? The same, like,
No way.
is it just?
It's a merchant generator. They're generally unregulated. I mean, they're subject to, the grid, MISO, and FERC compliance, but at the state level, they are not a regulated entity by the IRC. They have limited jurisdiction. Wholesale provider.
I have a question about carbon capture sequestration. So, I mean, given
How long you got?
well, given the bad decisions that Duke has been making about purchasing all this coal, it seems pretty obvious that that's just a way for them to sell the idea that they're being green. But I don't know if I'm making this up, but I thought I remember seeing a story a few years ago about one of these things breaking and suffocating a town or something.
Well, that was the pipeline down in Mississippi. Yeah, that ruptured, and lots of coverage of Syracuse, Mississippi, and the CO2 pipeline break. Yeah, so, and there was a recent pipeline eruption as well. So there's that's a little bit of a separate issue, but there's lots of concerns about carbon capture and storage as well as the related pipeline transportation network. But going back to Edwardsport and that study, in case we forgot, let's not forget, let's turn back the clock to 2005. Edwardsport was built under the guise of they were going to capture CO2. Let's not forget that. They were going to capture CO2, cleanest coal plant in the world, and they were going to store it right there in Knox County under the plant at a depth of at least 8,000 feet. Guess what? Geology wasn't suitable. They did a carbon capture study that showed it was way too expensive. They asked the IORC for permission to expand the area and study, areas going northwest and east of Edwardsport to look for suitable geology. They wanted a couple of $100 million to do that. IORC said no. So let's not forget that they sold this plant to the state of Indiana under the guise of quote-unquote clean coal with carbon capture and storage. CAC was telling everybody that would listen, this is a total lie. They will not capture one drop of CO2 at Edwardsport. This is just greenwashing to get approval for billions and billions and billions of dollars in capital investment. Edwardsport represented, I don't know what today, but for quite a while represented about a third of their total earnings in the state of Indiana. And now, let's fast forward almost 20 years later, and guess what? Now they want to do CCS at Edwardsport again. Did we say we were going to bury it at 8,000 feet? No, we meant 5,000 feet. So now they're going to allegedly bury it at 5,000 feet instead of 8,000 feet above the Mount Simon in the Potomite formation. And they've got, $69 million from the DOE to study CCS at Edwardsport, even though we've already been down this path. We already know the geology is not suitable, it's too expensive, it doesn't work, yet here we are again, and yeah, it's just an excuse to keep those assets open, keep running those coal plants, and make enormous amounts of profit at the detriment of consumers and our environment. Maggie, did you have a question? I just had your hand up for a while.
Yeah, a couple things. First of all, I want to just thank all of you at CAC and Sierra Club tremendously for the passion and energy and excellent work that you're doing for all of us. I just want to thank you tremendously, and thank you, Representative Pierce, for being here and always being there for all of us. I want to just say there's about 30 of us here in the room, and you said there were 1,200 people in Evansville, and it really mattered. So I think this week, I'm embarrassed to say this because I'll be out of town next week, but we have our work cut out for us over the next week. We have to get a lot of people. We have to talk to our colleagues, to our neighbors, to our friends, and get people out, because we're 30 now, and we have to a large number. And the other thing I wanted to do is ask, Representative Pierce, do you have any sort of advice or suggestions or guidance on how to get other important, figures in the community there, or other things that you want to tell us?
Well, I think, you've got a week, so you can all, if you live in the city, you can all call your 3 at-large city council members in your districts. That's 4 legislators or council members who represent you. You can ask them. You can call your county officials. Say, I'd really like to see you at this meeting sticking up for us. So, elected officials are kind of trained to respond to their constituents for the most part. So I think that's the thing. If you can get, some emails, some phone calls going into these local officials saying, look, there's a hearing right here in your own community. You need to show up and speak for us. And the reason why they had a hearing here is because Representative Yoder and I asked them to have one here. Because we said there are people who care about this issue, the people impacted by it. We're kind of a bit of a regional hub for this part of the state. And so have it down here, and they've scheduled it. And quite honestly, my concern is there are going to be 5 people there.
Yeah.
Right? And then the next time I say, oh, this is another important thing I'd like you to have in my community, they're going to say, well, the turnout wasn't that great last time, so we'll have it in Indianapolis or some other, far off place. So I hope that everyone will do what they can to get people there. And you can certainly call all of your elected officials, heck, from the township trustee on up, and say, this is a big thing that impacts the people you serve, so please come out and tell them if they're not up on the issue, check out the CAC website, and they can get all the information they need.
So if all of us were to do that are in this room, and ask one other person or 2 other, that would be 60 calls. And that, I would think that would make a big difference. The other, I'll commit, I can't be here next week, I'll commit to contacting my networks and my friends and go beyond until I usually would, and I hope everybody here will do that so that we have a good turnout. I saw some coverage of the Evansville, and it was really remarkable, but we haven't heard the buzz around here yet, and we've got to create that.
Yeah, on Representative Pierce's point, remember the field hearing you asked for the TSA filing that we got at the convention center, and it was like a 15-minute hearing, and there were like 4 people in the room. Yeah, which was disappointing.
Well, and on the legislative topic, we got 300 days now, right? Because
Well, thanks to the General Assembly.
Right.
It's a General Assembly that said, Commissioner, you've got 300 days to figure out this case.
And
They used to take a year and a half. Duke Energy and other utilities go, boy, it's taking a really long time to do rate cases. So the General Assembly, one of those laws, Senate Bill 560, which was also the tracker for transmission and distribution, says that Mr. and Mrs. Commission, you have 300 days to issue a final order in this case. And if you don't, the utility can raise their rates without a final order subject to refund. We've not had a utility do that yet. But the law not only basically requires the commission issue an order in 300 days, but it says, if you need more time, Mr. and Mrs. Commissioner, the utility can raise their rates, automatic rate increase if they want.
just that condensed timeline means, CAC's working to get the word out for Terre Haute, then shipping to Bloomington, then we got Fishers the week after Bloomington. And guess what? Duke is one of 5 large utilities, and we gotta look at gas, and we gotta look at water, and there's carbon capture popping up. So it really spreads you thin when you have to get all the public comments in the first 3 months of the case, right? Which I feel like is maybe an extension of having a shorter time.
Yeah, they drop these cases. Nothing's better than utility dropping a huge rate case, and Kerwin and Ben getting calls from reporters like 20 minutes after Duke sends out their press release going, hey, what do you think about this rate case? It's like, I don't know, it's gonna take us 3 weeks to read this thing.
You mentioned that you're a nonpartisan organization, and I understand that. There are so many of the groups who worry about the environment and everything are nonpartisan organizations. The problem is that this has got 2 prongs. One is the legislature doing policy that is actually working for the utilities, and the other is the hearings that we have. I think that people need to look at who is enabling the utilities to do what they're doing. using your own information. I followed Eric Cook's single-handedly from 2008 on, passed these laws, carried these laws, and yet in Bloomington, Indiana, the Chamber of Commerce gives him awards as being an exemplary representative, now a senator, a state senator. Without people knowing which legislators, I don't care what party they are, which legislators are passing these bills, voting for these bills that are enabling the utilities as Duke and these others to do what they're doing in spite of the courts and everything. We've got to name names so people know who in the heck to vote for.
Well, I disagree with that. We clearly post the bills that we're following, the authors and sponsors of those bills. We post voting records, campaign contributions, break them out by party. So it's right there for all to see. So, yeah.
Are these slides available?
Yeah, we'll post these to our website. Yeah. One of you, move above that.
I have a question. Are there many corruption laws like the IURC board members? Are they not allowed to be stockholders with Duke Energy? Are they not allowed to go work for them after they've served on the IURC? I mean, Indiana's always lax in so many of these laws that I just imagine, because to see them ask for a higher return on investment is just asking Indiana people to subsidize stockholders. So that's just basic.
I'm not sure about IURC rules I don't know about IURC rules about whether or not commissioner or commission staff can be investors. Legislators certainly can, and they're supposed to disclose those in those financial disclosures that they file. Although when you look at those financial disclosures, they're pretty thin and frequently blank. You know, as far as jobs, I mean, it's an ultimate revolving door over there. I mean, the ethics scandal was all about ALJ and Chief General Counsel at the IURC, Scott Storms, who left the commission on a Friday and started working at Duke Energy on a Monday, and got a waiver, believe it or not, from the Ethics Commission. There's supposed to be a 1-year cooling off period, but rarely is there actually a 1-year cooling off period, because many of those folks will get waivers from the Ethics Commission. So there are rules, laws, policies in place, but there's also ways around those rules, laws, and policies as well.
I'm thinking about the way that Duke is looking at this and the arguments that they're gonna make. So first of all, I'm wondering, obviously there has been inflation. So do you know what percentage, that $42 or $45 a month, what percentage of that is from what the average bill is already? Like, do you know how much of an increase that is percentage-wise? And yeah, and also I'm wondering if anyone has figured out how much their net income would be if they don't get this rate hike. If anyone's figured that out.
I can't remember the percentage, how that shakes out off the top of my head. But it's large.
It's around 33%, somewhere in there.
Yeah.
33%.
So way above inflation.
It's way above inflation, definitely above 20%, maybe close to 30%. When you're looking at the bill impact, it's about $129 a month now, going up to $171 a month about in 2026. So I pull out my calculator to do that, but it's 42 divided by 129 is the rough number.
What was the other question?
If anyone knows what their net income will be without this rate hike, or will they claim it and lose?
Well, I think on that one slide, Ben had what their net income is now. And the reality is that, when Ben was talking about that 10.5%, that's stuff that CAC loves to say utilities have a guaranteed rate of return. Utilities vigorously object to that characterization and say that they have the opportunity to earn that rate of return. So in order to realize, you know, the number Ben showed as far as what is the impact of 10.5%. In order to realize that, that means they're going to sell the amount of kilowatt hours that gets them to that number. So that's why the net income numbers, the real net income numbers as reported on 10Ks and 10Qs are the one that are the actual numbers to follow. But I think Ben's slide had what it would be without that increase. And it was still extraordinary.
Yeah, so they're projecting you'd still get $3 billion a year or so in revenue. I'm not sure in terms of like, what does that math turn into in terms of what return would they then earn percentage-wise? I don't have that number off the top of my head. But yeah, utilities.
They'll still make money.
Yeah, they're still making money. They're just saying, well, we're not going to make that full 10.5% net income if we don't raise rates this amount.
They're still paying their CEO millions of dollars.
Yeah.
I'd like to see that CEO contribute some of their money to our poverty level here. 35% of our kids are on free and reduced lunch. I want those kids, they get free lunch. What about their parents at home? What does this increase mean for those 35% of our parents sending kids to school? What are they going to give up because they now have to spend $42 a month? It's just, it's insane.
No, it's outrageous. It's outrageous when you see a company that is earning close to $3 billion saying they need more money. At the same time, a quarter of their customers can't afford their.
And they want us to pay for their mistake.
Yes.
Their mistake on
No,
the
it's
coal
outrageous.
ash. We have to pay for their coal ash because they continue to burn coal.
Bottle that up and let it out next Thursday at the convention center.
I'll be there.
They need to hear that.
They did.
I've said it before.
Oh, I know you have.
Speaking of next Thursday, is there a limit on like time or?
I mean, I think, you know, what the OECC will do, welcome to the field hearing, here's how this works. They'll tell, you know, try to limit your comments to 3 to 5 minutes, but I've been to hundreds of field hearings. I've never seen them cut anybody off.
Okay.
And I've seen some people go on almost in a bad way, on, and, you know. So I would encourage folks to be thorough but concise. You know, that 3 to 5 minute window, that's the sweet spot because things will get repetitive.
I'll yield my extra time to Kathleen.
But, you know, that's the opportunity, you know, to your points. I mean, I've cried at field hearings. I remember a field hearing in South Bend. I had an M-rate case where a senior on fixed income came with her bank statements and her social security checks and said, this is my income on a monthly basis. Had an envelope, read out, this is my rent. This is my electric bill, my gas bill, my water bill, all of her expenses. And she said that leaves whatever, $37 for the grocery store. She goes, I buy, you know, a quart of milk. Well, she listed what she bought. And she goes, you know how much money I have left? $3. I&M wants, you know, whatever it was at that time, $24 a month. Can somebody tell me where that's going to come from? Or the field hearing in Fort Wayne where they put him on the news. He started crying while he was testifying because his wife was ill, needed a lot of care, and he talked about the time that he had to choose. His lights were about to get disconnected, and his wife needed his medication. And he coughed up and started crying and had to stop himself. And he was crying about, I paid I&M so that I still had power because my wife relies on some metal equipment, but because I paid I&M, I couldn't go to CVS and get my wife's prescription. You know, and it's gut-wrenching, it's heartbreaking, but that's the sort of stories that they need to hear, and it's the sort of stories they're hearing more and more and more and more. That's why I'm somewhat feeling a little bit of a shift in the winds, big time, so.
You just heard a passionate, court-appointed special advocate.
Yes.
I get to live with most days. But what she's not saying is the judge who just recently retired after several years in that position, is an old friend of hers. So when she reactivated her role in that organization, she asked the judge, what's different from a decade or two previous when I was here before? What do you think he told her? All these are drug related with the parents. That's the reality we live in this society today. It's about drugs and more drugs. So if she repeats some of that passion in 30 seconds and makes an impression, is that more important than somebody else talking 3 or 4 minutes about something else and just kind of words?
I don't know that the time matters necessarily, it's the content that matters, it's the message that matters, it's the narrative that matters. And so that's why it's being concise. Say what you need to say as quickly as possible, but also as thoroughly as possible. Don't cut yourself short, but you don't have to speak for 5 minutes. And many people out in Evansville, they got up there for 45 seconds and just, so were you crazy? I think I see the security guard looking at us, like, are these people leaving? Okay, go ahead.
Make a quick comment. I just emailed about 650 people, but I have a lot of stuff in my email. And this was towards the top, but a lot of people responded and said they knew the hearing was on the 20th.
Great.
They weren't coming tonight.
Right, yeah.
So I didn't get a response that way.
Excellent.
To let you know,
Excellent.
this isn't it. I think there's been some confusion because there's been so many meetings.
Yep.
And they want to understand when the public hearing is. So we just I'll make that clear in my email to the people that I email.
Yep,
Okay.
perfect, great, thanks. Anything else before this guy probably drags us all out of here?
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Yes.